What occurs when a prejudiced officer targets the wrong individual and the truth unfolds in front of a crowd? It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in Portland, Oregon, a day when families filled the local parks. Joggers lined the trails, and the aroma of food trucks wafted through the crisp air. At Franklin Park, one of the city's busiest green spaces, the atmosphere was vibrant yet peaceful. Children played on swings, friends laughed over picnic blankets, and the distant hum of live music contributed to the charm. In the center of this lively scene stood a man named Everett. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit with polished shoes, exuding a calm yet commanding presence. Everett had been seated at a cafe near the park, reviewing documents for his job as a civil investigator, when a minor misunderstanding escalated into a much larger issue. The cafe manager, agitated and defensive, was now arguing with Everett over an accidental double charge on his bill. Onlookers sensed the rising tension, though Everett's voice remained measured. "I understand mistakes happen," he said, holding up his receipt, "but I've already paid once. I'm just asking for a correction." However, the manager's response was loud and unhinged. "You people always think you can come in here and cause trouble," he barked, his words slicing sharply through the air. Everett froze momentarily, taken aback. The phrase "you people" struck him like a slap, and he felt the weight of the stare surrounding him. Before he could respond, the door chimed, and in walked Officer Grayson, dressed casually but exuding the authority of someone accustomed to control. Grayson had overheard snippets of the argument as he entered and instantly decided he understood the situation without asking a single question. He stepped between the two men demanding, "What's going on here?" His gaze was fixed squarely on Everett. The cafe manager pointed angrily, saying, "This guy's causing a scene over nothing. I want him out." Everett turned to Grayson, his expression calm yet firm. "Officer, there's no scene. I was double charged, and I simply asked for it to be corrected. That's all." But Grayson wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. To him, Everett's sharp suit and composed demeanor were irrelevant. He perceived a problem that needed swift and forceful resolution. "Step outside," Grayson ordered, his hand twitching near his hip where his baton rested. Everett's voice lowered, steady and firm. "I've done nothing wrong, officer. I'm happy to talk, but there's no need for this." Grayson's response was quick and chilling. "I said step outside." Before Everett could say another word, the situation escalated in ways that no one in the cafe could have foreseen. The cafe fell silent as Officer Grayson's voice rang out, his words sharp and unyielding. A few patrons exchanged uneasy glances while others reached for their phones, sensing that something was about to unfold. Everett stood his ground with his hands clearly visible, yet his composed demeanor seemed to irritate Grayson further. "Officer, I'm not resisting," Everett stated, his voice calm but resolute. "There's no need for this aggression." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped, stepping closer, with the baton now unhooked from his belt. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken assumptions and fears. As Everett raised his hand slightly in a gesture of openness, Grayson interpreted it as defiance. Without warning, the baton came down hard, striking Everett on the shoulder. The crack of impact echoed through the cafe, followed by collective gasps from the crowd. "Stop!" a woman near the counter yelled, her voice trembling. "He didn't do anything." Everett stumbled but remained upright, clutching his arm. His eyes met Grayson's, and for a moment, the room seemed frozen in time. The look on Everett's face was not one of anger, but rather quiet, piercing disbelief. "Officer, you're making a mistake," Everett said, his voice still steady despite the pain. "You don't know who I am or why I'm here." Grayson's face flushed with a mix of adrenaline and frustration. "I don't care who you are," he shouted. "You can't cause trouble and then play the victim." At that moment, the young man at the back of the cafe began recording on his phone, prompting others to join in, capturing every detail: the officer's aggression, Everett's calmness, and the rising murmurs of outrage. Someone called 911. A patron yelled, irony dripping from their voice. "This is police brutality." Grayson glanced at the phones pointed his way, but didn't loosen his grip on the situation. Instead, he seized Everett's arm and started dragging him toward the door. Everett remained calm, his demeanor sharply contrasting with the surrounding chaos. Once outside, the scene spilled into the park. Families paused their activities, joggers halted, and a crowd began to form. Everett's voice, though strained, was clear. This isn't how justice works. He addressed not just Grayson, but everyone present. This isn't right. The recording continued, capturing Grayson's growing discomfort as more voices joined in. "Let him go," someone yelled. Another added, "You're out of line." Grayson's hand hesitated near his baton as the weight of the crowd's judgment began to weigh on him. But before he could respond, a voice cut through the noise. "Hey, isn't that the civil rights investigator? I've seen him on the news." A murmur spread among the onlookers as realization set in. Everett wasn't just another cafe patron. He was Everett James, a notable investigator for the state's Human Rights Commission, known for exposing systemic discrimination throughout the city. The man Grayson had struck wasn't a troublemaker. He was a guardian of justice. Grayson's confidence wavered, his grip loosening on Everett's arm. However, the damage was done. Cameras continued to roll, and the crowd's anger was now intensely directed at him. This was just the beginning. The repercussions would unfold quickly and deeply, far beyond anyone's expectations. By the time the police cruiser arrived, Officer Grayson's composure had shattered. The crowd outside the cafe had grown, their voices increasingly loud and furious. Everett sat on a park bench, ice pressed to his shoulder, maintaining remarkable composure. His quiet dignity contrasted sharply with the turmoil surrounding him. The responding officers, alerted by frantic calls from witnesses, quickly sensed that something was amiss. Sergeant Paula Hensley approached Everett cautiously. She recognized him from local news segments and public hearings, and the pieces fell into place. "Mr. James," she asked, her voice softer than usual, "are you all right?" Everett nodded, his calm gaze meeting hers. "I'm fine," he replied, "but this needs to be documented." Hensley glanced at Grayson, who now appeared visibly shaken, fidgeting as he tried to justify his actions to the other officers. He was being uncooperative, Grayson muttered, avoiding eye contact. However, his words held little weight against the multitude of phone recordings and eyewitness accounts. Hensley turned back to Everett. "Would you like to press charges?" Everett's response was composed. "I'd like the truth to come out, Sergeant. I'm not here to punish. I'm here to expose what's broken." What followed was a whirlwind of statements, reports, and phone footage reviewed at the precinct. Each piece of evidence painted a damaging picture of Grayson's conduct. However, what truly shocked the department wasn't just the incident itself, but the reason Everett had been at the cafe. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Everett had been working undercover for months, quietly gathering evidence of discriminatory practices in local businesses. The cafe was one of several establishments he had flagged for biased treatment of customers based on their race or appearance. His role as a civil investigator was more than just a job. It was a mission to expose the subtle yet pervasive inequities embedded in daily life. The department's internal affairs team quickly shifted their focus from the cafe incident to a broader examination of Grayson's record. What they discovered was concerning. Years of complaints about excessive force, biased language during stops, and a pattern of targeting minority communities had been quietly filed away. Grayson's behavior that day wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a long history of unchecked actions. News of the incident spread rapidly, with clips from the cafe going viral within hours. Social media erupted with outrage, and hashtags demanding justice began trending nationwide. Local news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting Everett's composed recounting of events alongside the incriminating footage of Grayson's actions. Yet, amidst the growing storm, Everett remained focused. He wasn't interested in sensationalism or revenge. Instead, he used his platform to highlight the systemic issues at play. "This isn't just about one officer," he stated during an interview. "It's about a culture that allows prejudice to thrive unchecked." Accountability begins with recognizing the problem. Back at the precinct, Grayson sat in a dimly lit conference room, his head in his hands. The weight of his actions and their consequences was finally sinking in. He had believed his badge protected him from scrutiny, but now he faced an overwhelming wave of accountability. Despite the mounting evidence and public demand for justice, he realized that his world had irrevocably changed. Everett was far from finished. His next steps would challenge Grayson in unforeseen ways. The city of Portland buzzed with activity as news outlets replayed the footage on repeat, and online discussions ignited debates about policing, bias, and accountability. Protesters gathered outside the cafe, calling for justice, not only for Everett, but for countless others who had faced similar treatment. Signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Bias in Policing" lined the streets, while speakers took turns sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Everett's image became a symbol of quiet strength, and his interviews went viral, not for their outrage but for their calm, empathetic tone. "Anger won't fix this," he said during a live broadcast. "Change requires understanding and accountability. We need to address the root issues, not just the symptoms." For Grayson, the fallout was swift. He was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, and his name became synonymous with the failures of modern policing. Neighbors avoided him, friends distanced themselves, and even his family struggled with the shame of his actions. The man who had once wielded authority with pride now felt its absence like a heavy weight on his chest. Concurrently, the cafe faced its own reckoning. Patrons boycotted the establishment, and the manager who had escalated the situation resigned under pressure. Former employees came forward with accounts of biased practices, further damaging the cafe's reputation. The ripple effect of Everett's calm defiance extended well beyond that initial incident. Amidst the turmoil, Everett stayed focused. He had no desire to foster division. Instead, he saw an opportunity for education and growth. He collaborated with community leaders to organize workshops on implicit bias, inviting both civilians and law enforcement to participate. His message was clear: change starts with individuals willing to confront uncomfortable truths. As protests persisted, Everett received an unexpected invitation from the city's police chief to speak at a department-wide training session. This move sparked both controversy and hope. Some officers resisted viewing Everett as an outsider attempting to undermine their authority, while others saw it as a chance to listen and learn. On the day of the session, tension filled the room. Officers, wearing expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism, filled the seats. Everett stood at the front, his presence both commanding and unassuming. He didn't raise his voice or assign blame. Instead, he shared his story, his struggles, the discrimination he had faced, and the hope he harbored for a better future. "Bias isn't always intentional," he said steadily, "but when it goes unchecked, it becomes dangerous. We'd all have a role to play in creating a system that serves everyone fairly." Silence enveloped the room as his words resonated, even affecting Grayson, who sat at the back. For the first time, he viewed Everett not as an adversary, but as a man fighting for something greater than himself. Yet the pivotal moment was yet to come, a confrontation that would force Grayson to confront his own humanity. He found himself in the dimly lit room of the Restorative Justice Center, his heart racing. Weeks had passed since the cafe incident, filled with public shaming, isolation, and sleepless nights. Now he was facing the man he had wronged. Across from him sat Everett, calm yet alert. The facilitator, a middle-aged woman with a soothing voice, initiated the session, stating, "This space is for open dialogue. No interruptions, no judgment. Officer Grayson, you may begin." Grayson felt parched and fidgeted uncomfortably in his seat, struggling to articulate his thoughts. "I want to apologize for what I did," he finally managed, his voice shaky. "How I acted was wrong." Everett's expression remained unchanged as he patiently waited for Grayson to continue. "I thought I understood what was happening that day," Grayson admitted, his voice wavering. "I believed I was doing my job, but I see now that I wasn't listening. I didn't see you. I only saw my assumptions about you, and I'm ashamed of that." A moment of silence followed before Everett spoke. "Do you comprehend what that moment cost me, Officer Grayson? It wasn't just physical pain. It was the realization that no matter how hard I work, how I dress, or how I carry myself, someone like you could still perceive me as a threat." Grayson looked down, his hands tightly clasped. "I do now," he acknowledged, "and I hate that I was part of the problem." Everett leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. "Recognizing the issue is the first step. But what matters is what you do next. What will you change, Officer Grayson? not just for yourself, but for those you serve. Grayson swallowed hard. I don't know yet, but I'm willing to learn. I want to be better. The facilitator nodded, encouraging the dialogue to continue. Everett softened, his voice imbued with quiet determination. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary, and it starts with accountability, understanding that actions have consequences. I'm not here to punish you, Grayson. I'm here because I believe people can grow. The session progressed, delving deeper into the choices that led to that day at the cafe and the broader implications of systemic bias. By the end, Grayson felt emotionally drained yet oddly hopeful. For the first time, he perceived his responsibility not as a burden but as an opportunity to make amends. The true test lay not in that room, but in how Grayson would carry these lessons forward in his life. In the weeks following the restorative justice session, Grayson took deliberate steps to address the damage he had caused, not just to Everett, but to the community he was sworn to protect. His first action was to attend every workshop on implicit bias offered by the department, even the optional ones. Initially, he felt like an outsider, surrounded by individuals who now viewed him as the poster child for misconduct. Yet he remained, listened, and took notes, his silence speaking louder than any defensive words could. Meanwhile, Everett continued his advocacy, using the platform gained from the incident to amplify the voices of the often overlooked. He spoke at town halls and schools, sharing his story not to incite anger, but to inspire change. His message was straightforward. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance. Then one afternoon, an unexpected moment occurred. Grayson approached Everett at a community event, this time without a uniform or badge, just a man extending a hand with humility. I know it will take time, Grayson said, his voice steady yet quiet, but I want to help however I can. Everett studied him for a moment before shaking his hand. Then start by listening, he replied. The rest will follow. Together, they initiated a joint program between the police department and the Human Rights Commission, aiming to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served, fostering mutual understanding through dialogue and training. It was an uphill battle met with skepticism from all sides, but Everett and Grayson persevered. For Grayson, the work became deeply personal. He began speaking at police academies, sharing his story as a cautionary tale for recruits. Your badge doesn't make you infallible. It makes you accountable. Over time, the program yielded results. Complaints of misconduct decreased, community trust improved, and officers began approaching their roles with greater empathy. Though the system wasn't perfect and challenges remained, the change was undeniable. As for Everett, his resolve only strengthened. He remained a relentless advocate for justice without losing sight of the humanity behind his mission. We all make mistakes, he often stated. What matters is whether we learn from them. However, this was not only Everett's story or Grayson's. It was a narrative about what can transpire when accountability meets courage and when individuals choose to see each other not as adversaries but as fellow human beings. Months turned into a year, and the city began to feel the ripple effects of Everett and Grayson's efforts. The program they established didn't merely change policies, it transformed people. Officers who once dismissed the idea of bias training began openly discussing their experiences, acknowledging their blind spots and striving to improve. Community members who had lost faith in the system began to see glimmers of hope. Everett's story, along with how he handled the injustice he faced, became a testament to the power of grace under pressure. His ability to channel pain into progress demonstrated that real change often begins with one person refusing to succumb to anger or despair. For Grayson, the journey was far from complete, but he was no longer the man who had entered that cafe with assumptions and arrogance. He carried the weight of his mistakes not as a burden, but as a reminder to remain vigilant against the biases that once dictated his decisions. Although he could never undo the harm he had caused, he dedicated himself to ensuring it wouldn't happen again, at least not under his watch. As the story spread beyond Portland, it became a source of inspiration, reminding people that accountability isn't about tearing each other down. It's about building something better together. The conversations initiated by Everett and Grayson resonated across communities, sparking discussions about justice, empathy, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Ultimately, the story leaves us with a question. What kind of change are we willing to fight for? Are we brave enough to look inward, confront our biases, and stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult?